You've probably said it, or at least nodded when someone else did. Don't immanentize the eschaton, and felt for a moment that you were on the right side of something important. But if someone asked you, right now, to explain what it actually means, not the bumper sticker, but the full argument, how far would you get? Most people get about one sentence. It means don't try to build heaven on earth. And that's not wrong, but it's the way a summary of a map is not wrong. It tells you where you are. It doesn't tell you how to read the terrain. The phrase points to something real and precise and genuinely diagnostic, a full philosophical account of what goes wrong in any civilization that tries to complete itself. And once you understand the argument behind it, you won't be able to listen to a political speech, read a religious manifesto, or sit through a church service the same way. That's the promise of this video. By the end of it, you will own the complete argument, its origin, its structure, its evidence, and its range, including the part that most people who use the phrase don't want to hear. Let's start with the words themselves, because they're hiding in plain sight. Eschaton comes from the Greek ta eschata, the last things. In classical Christian theology, the last things are four: death, judgment, heaven, and hell. They are the final horizon of human existence, not events inside history, but the end of history, the transcendent completion toward which all of time is ordered. The eschaton is not something you build. It is something that comes, or something that receives you. Immanentize is Latin in origin, from immanens, meaning remaining within. The immanent order is the present, visible, earthly world. Politics, economics, culture, institutions, the world you can see and touch and vote in. So to immanentize the eschaton means, literally, to pull the end of history into the present order, to collapse the transcendent horizon into an achievable, earthly goal, to take what was always understood as the final, unreachable completion of human existence and reframe it as something we can build, now, here, by the right political arrangement, the right revolution, the right restoration, the right people in power. That is the move. That is what the phrase names, and the man who gave it its full philosophical weight did not arrive at this diagnosis in a library. He arrived at it under surveillance. In 1938, Erich Voegelin was a political philosopher at the University of Vienna. He had already published 2 books analyzing Nazi racial ideology, not from a distance, but from inside an Austria that was moving toward absorption into the Reich. He diagnosed National Socialism as a political religion, a movement that had taken the structure of Christian eschatology, the chosen people, the saving knowledge, the final redemption, and filled it with secular content. Race instead of grace, the Reich instead of the kingdom, historical necessity instead of divine providence. The Gestapo visited him twice. He understood that the visit would eventually not be a visit. When Germany annexed Austria in March 1938, the Anschluss, Voegelin had days, perhaps hours. His wife, Lissy, working with urgency and precision that her husband later credited as the reason he survived, obtained the exit visas. They fled to Switzerland, and eventually to the United States. What Voegelin carried with him was not just a manuscript. It was a diagnosis written from inside a living political religion, by a man who understood that the ideas were not merely wrong, they were dangerous in a particular way. They offered salvation in the only place it cannot be found, in political victory, in earthly history, in the hands of the elect who possessed the saving knowledge. That slim, urgent work he'd written before fleeing the political religions published in Vienna in 1938 already contained the structural core of the argument. Nazism, Bolshevism, and kindred movements were not simply political programs, they were religions. They created a sacred order, complete with rites, martyrs, a chosen people, an enemy who embodied cosmic evil, and an eschatological promise. The final redemption was achievable now, here, by us. The disease had a name. He just hadn't finished diagnosing its full range yet. That would come 14 years later, in Chicago. In 1952, Voegelin delivered the Walgreen Lectures at the University of Chicago. They were published that same year as The New Science of Politics, the book that would give American conservatives the phrase that became a movement slogan. And the argument in that book is worth understanding in full, because it is not a simple argument. Voegelin traced what he called Gnosticism, and it's important to be precise here because he was not using that word loosely. Ancient Gnosticism, the movement that flourished in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, had a recognizable structure. The world is fundamentally broken and controlled by a corrupt power. A spiritual elite possesses saving gnosis, hidden knowledge that liberates the initiated from the world's corruption. And history moves toward a final liberation from the broken order. Voegelin's claim, and this is the core of his argument in The New Science, is that modern political movements replicate this structure, but with secular content. The broken world is now capitalism, or the old aristocratic order, or the degenerate culture, or the oppressive system. The saving knowledge is now Marxist analysis, or racial science, or progressive theory, or nationalist mythology. The chosen people, those who possess the gnosis, are now the revolutionary vanguard, or the purified race, or the progressive elect, or the awakened remnant. And here's the move that matters. Once you believe you possess the saving knowledge and that history can be completed, that the final transcendent end of human existence can be achieved within the immanent order, the constraints fall away. Because you are not engaged in ordinary politics, the negotiation of competing interests in an open and uncertain world. You are completing history. You are the instrument of redemption. And the people who oppose you are not merely wrong. They are enemies of the final order, obstacles to salvation. Voegelin identified 3 modes of immanentization in the new science of politics. In the first, the intramundane mode, the perfect society is achievable now, in this world, through the right political structure. This is Marxism in its most utopian form and National Socialism in its racial fantasy. In the second, the progressivist mode, history itself is the vehicle. We are moving, inevitably, toward the perfection of humanity, and our role is to accelerate the arc. This is the progressivist faith of the 20th century, the belief that the right side of history is a real place you can be on. In the third, the utopian mode, the right arrangement of power, institutions, and culture will produce a state of being that fulfills what human beings were always meant to become. All 3 share the structural move. The transcendent end is brought into the immanent order. The tension between what we are and what we might finally become, the tension that Christian thought had always maintained, the refusal to collapse the kingdom into any earthly achievement, is resolved by force. We will build what can only be received. C.S. Lewis, writing in Mere Christianity in the same year Voegelin delivered his Chicago lectures, noticed something that resonates with this diagnosis. He observed that putting second things first doesn't just fail to achieve the second things, it loses both the first and the second. The attempt to make a finite good into an absolute does not elevate it. It corrupts it. Lewis was not using Voegelin's framework, but he was circling the same recognition. There is a kind of ambition that reaches for the final thing, the complete thing, the thing that will finally hold, and in reaching for it destroys the real goods that were available. The movement that wants to save everything tends to save nothing. Now, if you've stayed with this argument this far, you have a tool, and a tool is only as honest as the range you're willing to apply it. Here is where most treatments of this phrase stop. The left wants utopia. Don't immanentize. The progressives believe in historical inevitability. Don't immanentize. The Marxists claimed saving knowledge. Don't immanentize. The Nazis made a political religion. Don't immanentize. Those applications are correct. They are also safe. Safe to say, safe to hear, safe to nod at. Voegelin was not interested in safe applications. The question his framework generates is structural, not tribal. It doesn't ask which side is doing this. It asks, does this movement claim to complete history? Does it claim to possess the saving knowledge that will finally, definitively, redeem the political order? Does it collapse the tension between the transcendent end and the immanent present, and then treat those who resist that collapse as enemies of the final order? If the answer is yes, the diagnosis applies, regardless of the content, regardless of who's doing it. And so the question the viewer of this video, the serious, faithful, politically engaged American who has used this phrase as a weapon against the progressive left, has to sit with is this. What do you make of movements within your own tradition that hold with theological confidence that Christian political action can and should establish God's kingdom in every sphere of culture and society, that the faithful, if sufficiently organized and sufficiently mobilized, can restore a Christian civilization? That political victory, the right laws, the right institutions, the right people in office, is not merely a legitimate good, but the vehicle of historical redemption? These movements go by different names. Some call it the Seven Mountains Mandate. Some trace to the Christian Reconstruction Project of Rousas Rushdoony. Some frame it in the language of renewing the nation, or taking back the culture, or the Great Commission applied to the structures of power. The theological range is real and the differences matter, but the structural question Voegelin's framework poses to all of them is the same. Is the transcendent end being pulled into the immanent order? Is political victory being asked to do the work that can only be done by what arrives from beyond history? To be precise, Voegelin never directly addressed dominionist theology. He died in 1985. These movements were present, but not yet at the cultural prominence they've since achieved. The application to these movements is an extension of his logic, not a direct claim he made, and it should be held as such, as a question his framework generates, not as something Voegelin himself pronounced, but the question is genuine. And it is the question the phrase demands. If you've spent years hearing, "Don't immanentize the eschaton" as a warning aimed outward, at the progressive, the utopian, the revolutionary, you are now holding the full argument. And the full argument does not stop at your side's border. This is not a counsel of despair, it is the opposite. Voegelin's alternative to immanentization was not withdrawal from political life. It was not quietism or cynicism or the conclusion that because the kingdom cannot be built, nothing is worth building. His alternative was what he called the open quest, and what he described, borrowing the Greek term, as existence in the metaxy, the in-between. The metaxy is the space in which human beings actually live, between the finite and the infinite, between the immanent and the transcendent, between what we are and what we might finally become. Classical Greek consciousness, Hebrew prophetic consciousness, and the Christian theological tradition all maintained this space, this tension. They did not resolve it. They inhabited it. They understood that the final order is real, that human beings are genuinely oriented toward a transcendent end, but that the final order cannot be produced by political action. It can only be anticipated, approximated, and pointed toward by the ordered life and the ordered soul. Voegelin began writing Order in History, his 5-volume philosophical history of consciousness, at the age of 55. He never finished it. He died with the project open, the final volume incomplete, the argument still in motion. That is not a failure. That is an enactment of the thesis. The quest is open. No system closes it. No political movement completes it. No election decides it. To live in the metaxy, to hold the tension rather than collapse it, is not a comfortable position. It is not the satisfaction of the revolutionary who believes history is on his side, or the triumphalism of the movement that believes the kingdom is within reach, or the despair of the person who concludes that because utopia is impossible, nothing matters. It is the harder and more honest position that the transcendent end is real, that human political life is genuinely ordered toward it, and that the refusal to collapse that tension, the refusal to make the final thing into an achievable earthly project, is itself a kind of faithfulness. That is what "don't immanentize the eschaton" actually means. Not a bumper sticker, not a weapon, a diagnosis, and, honestly held, a mirror. If what you've just heard is landing, if the argument is real to you now, and you want to go directly to Voegelin's own words, I put together a companion for exactly that moment. 50 of his most essential passages, each with a plain language explanation of what it means, why it matters, and where you'll recognize it in the world right now. It's called the Voegelin Quotes Companion, and the link is in the description. It's designed to be read alongside these videos, or to take you further into the texts on your own. In either case, it meets you where you are. What Buckley heard in Voegelin's Chicago lectures, and what he turned into a slogan, was the warning. What he couldn't fit on a bumper sticker was the diagnosis underneath it, the account of why this move is always tempting, always destructive, and always, in the end, a betrayal of the very thing it claims to achieve. Every movement that has tried to complete history has ended by betraying the goods it promised to protect. Every political religion has found, in the moment of its triumph, that it had not built the kingdom. It had merely replaced the old disorder with a new one, more violent and more closed than what it overthrew, because it had convinced itself it had the saving knowledge and the authority of the final end. The Christian understanding of history, and Voegelin was insistent on this, careful to distinguish what he was defending from what he was diagnosing, holds that the transcendent end is real. The orientation of human life toward final order, toward the good, toward God, is not an illusion. But the end comes from beyond. It is not built from below. It is not achieved by the correct political arrangement or the right legislation, or the faithful remnant finally in power. it is, in the deepest sense, received. To live in that tension, to work in the world, to build what can be built, to pursue justice in the immanent order, while refusing to ask the immanent order to carry the weight of final redemption, is not resignation. It is what Voegelin called the ordered soul, not the soul that has found the answer, the soul that can hold the question. Voegelin spent his life holding it. He wrote from inside a political religion that wanted to kill him. He built an argument that took the rest of his career to unfold, and that he died with still unfinished. And what he left is not a system that closes, but a question that opens. Can you see the structure of the move? The collapse of the transcendent into the immanent, in the movements you are part of, not only in the movements you oppose. That's the question he'd put to you. Specifically, tell me the political or religious movement you've been most loyal to, and the moment you first noticed it was promising more than politics can deliver. I read these.